What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Unplayable, where we have another deck tech for you guys. David, I am so excited about this one.
Yeah, I'm looking at this guy on the screen, and is this like an unreleased leader from set 4? I don't think I've ever seen this guy before.
Some people think that. The people who don't probably pulled the showcase and are like, "Well, I guess I got to make this guy work now." Or our friend Josiah, who just loves drawing
There you
cards.
go.
Shout out to our boy.
Pre Vizsla, man.
But Pre Vizsla, it's hitting the table, and I think in a really cool way. And so I was kind of messing with an idea around what would Pre Vizsla look like as an actual control leader. This is something that's kind of been in the works in set one when Darth Vader Blue came out. It was just minimal units and just a whole lot of damage. And it was just the controlliest of the controls, which I know is not your favorite play
No.
style, but it's powerful. It's really powerful. It wins a lot of tournaments. And so essentially what we're looking at here is Bosk Blue is winning tournaments right now. It is a menace. And we're in the midst of like planetary qualifiers. And so people are showing up to tournaments. This is something that I was thinking about that I was like, you know what if I actually showed up to an event with this deck? Would it actually have some legs? And so, yeah, I'm excited to kind of talk about it, share kind of some thoughts on here, and get it
And
rolling.
I think there's something to be said for bringing a leader that people aren't used to playing against, because you might end up getting some optimal turns that your opponent doesn't realize they're giving you because they're not used to playing against this, right? Like you
Totally.
can kind of know how Sabine plays, right? You kind of know how Django plays, but when you can do something different, and they have to read the leader a few times. We talked about this on our Padme deck tech. I think that's valuable. So, um, but yeah. So what is Pre Vizsla trying to do, man? What do you?
Sure. So Pre Vizsla wants to draw cards and wants to use those cards to its advantage. So on the leader's side, it has actions, spend one resource, and then you can deal damage to a unit equal to the number of cards you've drawn that round, not including the two that you draw in the upkeep. And so a lot of people built this pretty mid-range, pretty like, hey, if the card says you can draw it or draw with it, you're gonna toss it in that deck and try to make that happen. So I think like Starwing Scout was getting used a lot as like the 4/1 space unit. If you have initiative, when it dies, draw two.
Yep.
Stuff like that that just have never seen play before for a reason that we're just trying to make work for the sake of the ability.
Mm.
And so you can use this ability. There's a few cards in here, which we'll go through in just a little bit, that trigger with that. But that's not the main objective here. The main objective is it does flip the epic action on 5, and it starts out as just a 4/6 on 5, which is pretty good stats for a 5 flip unit. But it says if you have 3 cards in your hand, it gets Saboteurs. So if there's pesky Sentinels, you can get around
It
it.
can nuke a village
Or
protector with a shield.
shields go away immediately. Yeah, Saboteur is really strong. And then if you have 6 cards in hand, you actually get +2/+0. So if you have 6 cards in hand, when you flip, it's a 6/6 Saboteur.
Yeah.
Crazy. So you're getting a lot of tempo. And so that just reminded me of Bosk quite a bit, which has been so good. And so I was like, okay, this isn't Bosk. It's not getting all of those bounties on you, just doing that little ping damage that way. But what I think this is bringing to the table as a leader is actually this card that only probably ever sees play with Pre Vizsla, which is old access codes.
Mm.
It costs 1. It's for +1/0, and if your opponent has more units than you do, you get to draw a card with
Mm.
it. So my thought with that is you flip Pre Vizsla, you play old access codes, you now have a 7/6 on board. If you have 6 cards in hands, which again we'll talk about like the way that you're going to be drawing cards and playing that direction. And so right now Quinlan Voss is really popular, Django's really popular, and so having a leader that can just do the 7 damage on its own seemed really strong to me. Where Bosk is only dealing 4 when it attacks,
Yeah.
Pre Vizsla just as the unit can deal up to 7, and so that's why I wanted to at least see what's going on here. What can we make work? The other thing I liked about it is you're not restricted to playing bounties. There's a couple in here just for Deathmark, just to be able to draw cards since you're killing a lot of their stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not having to play the top targets. You're not having to play the other bounties to make Bosk work, which means that you have more things in your deck that can play the control matchup, which I like quite a bit.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, let's get into it. What's your early plays looking like?
Yeah. So you're hardly ever pushing the agenda with early game. Purging is the only card that if you see turn one, you're probably playing at turn one. Typically, you're just going to take initiative on that first turn, and then you're kind of responding to what they're doing. Or if you have
Which
Death
keeps
Mark,
cards
you
in
can
your
play it
hand,
on
I
their turn to
guess,
play.
on one hand.
What's
And
that?
that by taking initiative, that keeps cards in your
Mhm.
hands, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that's where rather than really playing into the having to draw cards, if you're only playing one card a turn just to kind of answer what they're doing, you actually can get to six pretty quickly without having to do too much card draw. But obviously, if you get purging, getting Pre Vizsla to six cards on the flip turn is very likely.
Okay.
The other thing I like about purging is Tarkin Town is just all over the meta right now, and so it with 5 health, yes, you're damaging itself, but they're having to probably attack into you that second turn to then do Tarkin Town if they're really trying to get this off the field. And at that point, they're using so many resources just to get rid of a card draw engine.
Yeah.
It's not ideal, but I'm typically okay with
Yeah.
it.
Okay. Interesting.
So, like I said, that's kind of the turn one play. If you're looking kind of like card by card, some of the cards I wanted to quickly hit on that first row of lower cost things is Bazine and Restock. We have one copy of each in here, and that's really for the control versus control matchup. So I really wanted to tech this deck to be able to beat Bosk, beat those control matchups. Anything that's trying to go into the late game or has 3 copies of Vigilance that could theoretically try to mill you out, I wanted to have the upper hand. And so Restock is obviously going to let you keep the Vigilances rolling if both of you guys get to no cards in deck.
Yeah.
Bazine, I like quite a bit because you can just resource it. It's going to cost you 6 since it's out of aspect to pull out, but by that time in the end of the game, spending 6 resources for Bazine isn't that big of a deal. So you can snipe the restock instead. So if you guys are going back and forth, both kind of getting down to the end of the game, you flip Bazine, they're not expecting it, and then just take the restock right away and then win the game that way. The other thing you can do is just if you're in a pinch or you just have some very clear cards, you're like, hey, I'm going to win this game unless they have this. As you're kind of thinking through what are some of the likely plays, like, hey, as long as they don't play Luke Skywalker here, I'm fine. You can go ahead and play that Bazine, knock Luke Skywalker out of their hand, and do something like that as well. So it's pretty flexible. It's expensive to do that,
Yeah.
but especially in the late game where there's just a couple cards that they could have to potentially beat you, it just gives you that extra bit of security just to make
Yeah.
sure that happens. So that's the only reason they're in here. You're always going to resource Bazine. You're only going to keep restock if you're in that control versus control meta.
Sure. All right, now at 3, I can see why you're okay taking the initiative because you've got 3 Power of the Dark Side, 3 Merciless Contests, which is just oppressive,
Yep.
dead. And
Yeah.
then,
Yeah. So that got really popular in Bosk as, hey, you have 6 copies of Power of the Dark Side, essentially.
yeah. And then you've got, of course, 3 I Am Your Father's, which synergizes really well with Pre Vizsla's ability, 3 Client, 3
Yeah.
Perilous Positions. So it does feel like, Client might be a little slow, but and it's interesting too because you see Client a lot in Boss because of the bounty piece, but you're
Correct.
running it in
Correct.
Vizsla.
Yeah, and that's a card that I do want to just keep testing. That's a card that you can just heal. So even though the bounty is even better in Bosk because that helps you ping and get that going, it's still pretty good in Pre Vizsla. So like I said, that's definitely a card that I want to test, see if there's something else that might be a little bit better in that slot. But just having a shield on there, having a 2/5, sometimes that's just enough. Like for takedown, open fire, which is in the sideboard, those kind of cards that just need to do damage, even vigilance, just to do some sort of damage it's possible. And then if that doesn't happen, you can use the bounty to heal back up because there's not, obviously with no top target, there's not a ton of opportunities to heal back in this deck. You have make an opening, you have vigilance, but that's where Bosk definitely has the upper hand with being able to at least game one have a little bit more play into some aggressive deck lists.
Mm-hmm.
This one is really banking on those 3 cost removals. And so obviously turn 2, you're going to remove whatever they play turn 1. And then the turn after Pre Vizsla, getting to play 2 of those cards is really solid.
Yep.
So, but yeah, I'm Your Father is kind of operating as 9 total copies of just single target removal. And obviously with I'm Your Father, you get to decide where that damage goes.
Yeah.
So the reason I like that card so much is because with Pre Vizsla's ability, typically you want to play that one on turn 3 though, where you have 4 resources up.
Yeah.
So you play I'm Your Father. They either just take the 7 to the face, or you draw 3 and are about to deal 3 damage back to them. But you have to keep 1 resource up to be able to do that.
No, that's cool. That's cool. All right, and then I feel like you've got the classic control suite of 3 Chilton, 3 Vigilance, 3
Totally.
Takedown, 2 Fells, 1 Vanquish. like 3 super lasers. Like,
Yep.
yeah, I don't think you leave home in blue villain control without
Yep.
those cards, right?
Yeah, and that is totally just the shell for just classic blue red control. Palpatine's been really solid in this list from what I've seen. I love getting just do all that ping damage because, like I said, a lot of this removal is actually dealing the damage rather than just spot removal. And so Palpatine can either snipe their board, like if they have a go wide board, you can snipe them that way. But also you can get them to the thresholds needed to like use the takedown, use the vigilance, things like that if needed.
Yeah. Very cool.
So yeah, like I said, it's not totally like changing the game with what blue red control is trying to do. Like I said, this is just bringing a new idea to the table for like what Bosk Blue is trying to do. But like I said, or like you said earlier, with bringing a leader that most people don't really know, that first game, they're not going to know that you're on hard control.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be assuming, okay, you're trying to draw cards, you're going to ping me that way, maybe a little bit control-y, but probably more mid-range. And they're not going to be playing into the, hey, you're just going to answer every single thing they do.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to talk about your sideboard?
Totally. Yeah. So I have a sideboard that is really teched to help with the aggressive matchups. The reasoning for that is because in the control versus control, if you're in a best of three, there's just a reality that you're not going to get to play all three games. And so you really want to make sure that you're going to win that first control game. And so that's why the restock and the Bazine are in the main list rather than the sideboard. Because if you lose that first game against the other Bosk Blue, there is a legitimate chance that you guys won't get to be able to finish all three games, especially if you're really trying to think
Blech.
through each play. With a deck like this, just a recommendation for control players in general, you got to play fast. And you are totally fine to ask your opponent to play a little quicker as well, not to speed them up, not to rush them or to pressure them into making bad plays. But all you're doing most of your turns is just playing the removal. And then they kind of sit in this think tank of like, okay, how do I play around their next removal? And so it's less about you playing very slowly and it's more about your opponent really kind of getting into that like think tank and trying to analyze
Sure.
that. So if you need to call a judge, if you, like I said, you're not trying to like shark anybody, which is just really trying to like use the best of three system against them. It's just to try to make sure that you have the most fair matchup possible.
I'll call a judge on you every
Um,
game we play. If we weren't in a
I
tournament,
love it.
yeah,
Yeah. Just to make sure you're like, Judge, he isn't doing anything wrong, but he will.
yeah, he's too
So
ugly to be
yeah,
playing.
it's just smart when you play against me. So that's just a good recommendation if we ever see you guys at a tournament. So, but get back to the sideboard. So there's 3 copies of Inferno 4, just a lot of early space units going crazy right now, specifically against like Django Red. They have a lot of just those 2 health space units that you just want to get rid of. Make an opening kind of the same thing. A lot of 2 health things with shield that you can just clear right away. Also, just more opportunities to heal, which is really nice against like Sabine, against Django, against Quinlan, those type of things.
Sure.
And then open fire as well. It's just when you don't need the late game necessarily to kill off their early stuff, open fire is great for taking care of that. So typically, I would bring those in against aggressive lists. I would pull out. Restock and Bazine, of course. I'd pull out the Super Laser Blasts because their hand is so low to the ground that if you're playing Super Laser Blast, they're probably just going to restock their field. And then from there, just kind of look through, especially like the Palpatine, Snoke, and Avengers for which ones make the most sense to pull out. So you're typically bringing those 9 cards in, taking 9 cards out, getting into the Super Laser Blast, and the Restock and Bazine is 5 of those. And then from the rest of like the super late game, pull out 4 more.
Yeah, awesome.
So
Very
yeah,
cool.
and then Snoke is in there as like the 10th slot. I don't have a good answer necessarily for like what's that like meta defining card that could potentially be like a silver bullet. It may not even need to be a silver bullet as much as just, hey, sometimes Snoke is just good and you want to play a 3rd copy of it. So that's why it's in there right now. If something else comes up as like a, hey, this is top of the meta and something you really need to be paying attention to, go ahead and bring that in there. If somehow upgrades go crazy, maybe it's a power failure, maybe it's a confiscate, or a disabling Fang Fighter, something like that. That slot's really more for just to answer whatever you're expecting to go against.
Very cool. Love it.
Yeah. So, like I said, that's the deck list. It's not super crazy as far as like what it's trying to do, but it brings a whole new flavor to what red blue villain could do. That I think can really be special.